Randomised Gaming presents.
Hello and welcome to another Randomised Gaming knowledge video. I am your host once again, Random Gamer Riven, and in this one we're actually going to take a more in-depth look at some of the issues we briefly covered in the Randomised Gaming, the 50-60Hz Mega Drive video. So we're actually going to take a look at the TradeMark security system on the Mega Drive 2 that prevents some games from playing. We're actually going to look at also how you can work around this issue using a Game Genie. And we're also going to take a look at a few games that don't actually work on NTSC consoles, period. And then we're going to discuss the 6-button pad in a bit more detail and some of the issues that has, and actually look at a few games that have suffered issues when using the official Mega Drive 6-button pad. So one of the main reasons for doing this video is also so that we can carry on what we said in the previous video and try and make sure that people don't throw away cartridges with issues like the TradeMark security system that the BIOS has for the Mega Drive 2, because there will be people who get the cartridge, plug it into their Mega Drive and suddenly find it doesn't work. And we want to stop people throwing away games because the majority of cartridges actually do work and just need a clean, or your Mega Drive needs a clean. It's very, very rare you'll actually get a game cartridge that doesn't work. I have one which is an absolutely knackered copy of Altered Beast. And it turns out when we actually took the cartridge apart the other day that one of the actual pins was badly damaged and scraped, and that we couldn't get that to work, period. I mean, in theory, we could still rebuild the pin and stuff. We thought, well, we've already got Altered Beast on the Classic Collection, hence why we did our recent Altered Beast video. And thought, well, we'll just video that because it's the same game, and Altered Beast is a bit of a turkey of a game anyway. But don't worry, we will actually mention Altered Beast again because the Japanese version of that is just one example of a game that doesn't support the BIOS screen on the Mega Drive 2. So, the BIOS screen, otherwise known as the TradeMark Security System screen, and before I begin I should actually say a huge shout out to this website segaretro.org, which actually provides a great breakdown on how this works. They actually provide a few examples of games that also don't work with it, and if you've not been to Sega Retro, I highly advise you have a view of it. It's a really good resource for Sega information. In fact, it's I've always found the Sega fans are much more committed to actually getting these resources about, because there really isn't a good Nintendo database site, or a PlayStation one for that matter, or a Microsoft one. It seems that the Sega fans really are the most dedicated of all of them out there. So what is the TradeMark security system, or the BIOS screen? Well, it was added in for the Mega Drive 2, and it was also included in late revisions of the Mega Drive 1 as well. Although the security system clearly had some implementation and planning, in fact, from looking at the actual documentation included on Sega Retro's website, it actually appears it's a remnant of some sort of master system encoding. Basically, for the Mega Drive 2, however, it's used as a way of checking whether the cartridge is licensed or unlicensed, or pirate or official. And basically, what the Mega Drive does once the BIOS is inserted in a Mega Drive 2, while most Mega Drive 1s don't have the Sega BIOS screen, a few of the late revision versions do, so be aware of that fact when purchasing a Mega Drive 1 and make sure you get someone to test it prior to actually buying it to make sure it has a BIOS or doesn't have a BIOS, depending which one you prefer. However, any game period will run on a Mega Drive 1 if it doesn't feature the BIOS. This includes unlicensed and pirate games. Possibly due to this, and possibly due to fears of games being pirated, Sega developed, in the Mega Drive 2, put in the BIOS screen, or the TradeMark Security System screen, as it seems to be called by Sega Retro. And what this does is this brings up a produced or under license screen message. Now, at first glance, it's just an interesting little screen that pops up. What it's actually doing is when this screen pops up, it's requesting a call in two places. And Sega Retro described this quite wonderfully. I'm not going to describe it in great detail as they do, but basically the BIOS is asking for the word Sega to be written in ASCII in two areas of the cartridge actually being pushed into the Mega Drive's RAM. If the cartridge doesn't do this, the video RAM locks up and the cartridge and the game basically black screens the Mega Drive. Basically the Mega Drive ceases to function, it just black screens. That's all it does if this fails the security check. Unfortunately, despite being documented in the original documentation, not all developers used this, and as a result there are some official games, quite surprisingly a large chunk of them being very early Sega games and some late ones as well, that don't function with the Mega Drive 2 because they don't make the correct call to bypass this issue. So basically there are a few official games that don't work with it. Now again, unlicensed games, of course, some developers like Accolade did figure out how to bypass the BIOS screen. However, there's a few early games where Accolade obviously didn't know how to do this, and they fail the BIOS screen check. Now, when they fail the BIOS screen check, as we mentioned, it black screens. The untrained eye, however, and people who haven't really done investigation, they may think the cartridge is dead. And as you're watching this video, you'll know that in case of these games, it's not actually dead, it's just failing the BIOS check. So let's give you a quick rundown of games that are known according to Sega Retro. First off, we'll start with the official licensed games that are known to fail the Mega Drive 2 BIOS check or the TradeMark security system. These games will not run on a Mega Drive 2, and these are official cartridges as well. Now, most of these are actually Japanese, but there are a few US and European ones. So to begin with, I'll quickly mention the Japanese cartridges. So, Space Harrier 2 Japanese launch cartridge, Super Thunderblade Japanese launch cartridge, Altered Beast or Jakuru Japanese launch cartridge, although I have heard people say they've had problems with some early European cartridges as well. Another Japanese only game that I'm not going to be able to pronounce properly, Osamatsu Kun Hakameka Gekeji. All cartridges appear to have that same key. Alex Kidd in The Enchanted Castle, or in the Japanese subtitle Tekimoi. Now, all Japanese cartridges supposedly don't work, but I've heard some early European and US cartridges may also have that issue. Phantasy Star 2, all Japanese cartridges also fail the check, as do all Super Daisukirin or Advanced World War, otherwise known. So again, that Japanese cartridges for that all fail. The other Japanese cartridges are, of course, Afterburner 2, which also fails. And bizarrely, the Sega Channel, which we'll discuss actually a little bit later, all Japanese cartridges fail that, which seems a bit bizarre seeing as the Sega Channel was a download service, but that died off pretty quickly. Most people probably aren't even going to have cartridges of that. Now, US-wise, Populous, all US cartridges supposedly fail both steps. Zane Golf in all regions apparently fails the steps, but only a Revision 0 cartridge according to Sega Retro. And Bodoken the Martial Spirit, all US cartridges apparently fail. I should actually try my European one just to double check, but that's Bodoken the Martial Spirit also fails check. Now, according to them, their known unofficial unlicensed games without support are Isidoi The Way of Stone, and they also quote Onslaught. Now, we know for a fact, having tested it, Onslaught doesn't work on a Mega Drive 2. We tried that. And I'm actually going to add to this list here that I'm seeing on Sega's Retro, as we know officially from Randomised Gaming, having tested it out, that, now this is an interesting one, Turricane, the unofficial Accolade release of Turricane, does not work on a Japanese Mega Drive 2. It works on a European Mega Drive 2 from what we tested. In fact, you can play fine on that. So we assume the bypass it's using to get around the TradeMark security screen is not working on Japanese systems. I don't know why, but obviously when they did the Mega Drive version of Turricane, they programmed it for European and US ones. So basically it works fine on bizarrely. It bypasses the screen correctly in European Mega Drive unit unmodified, but on a Japanese one, somehow it's failing the TradeMark security system. So, if you have one of these games, some of you may be thinking, oh great, I've got to get a Mega Drive 1 then if I'm trying to play these games on Mega Drive 2. Actually, no you don't. There is a way around it. And what you need to get yourself is a Game Genie. Yes, that's right, a Game Genie. And the reason you want a Game Genie is because the Game Genie, you of course insert cartridge into that. And the Game Genie, as that's the primary cartridge, actually makes the Game Genie itself is officially licensed, and that actually makes the correct call to the BIOS. So in effect, when you insert an unlicensed or a game that doesn't work with the TradeMark screen into the Game Genie makes the correct call for the cartridge on its behalf, in effect, meaning that any games that has issues with the TradeMark screen can be played successfully with the Game Genie, as our recent Onslaught video show, which I'm just going to put a card up to right now. So the Game Genie itself is a nice bit of kit, and it does allow you to play games that don't support the Mega Drive BIOS screen, or Mega Drive 2 BIOS screen to be exact, because of course these games all run perfectly fine on a Mega Drive 1. It's only the Mega Drive 2 they have this issue with. I should point out the Mega Drive 2, and it probably affects later systems such as the Wonder Mega, and I suspect the Mega Drive 3 as well. We don't own a Wonder Mega, and we don't own a Mega Drive 3, so I am slightly speculating there, but I would assume they also have the produced or under license screen in them. I might be incorrect though, as I've never handled that hardware directly. But the Game Genie itself is actually a really nice piece of kit, and it's a great way to play these games. There are two caveats when using the Game Genie. First off, the Game Genie does not support battery backup. So if you're using the Game Genie to play something like Phantasy Star 2 on the Japanese cartridge, which, as we said, doesn't support the BIOS screen. That is going to give you a bit of a headache because you won't be able to save the game. So you can't really play that. Even you can only play it for as long as you leave it in, unless you fancy leaving your Mega Drive on for hours and hours. And I wouldn't advise doing that. Basically, you're not going to be able to play any game with a battery backup. And the other caveat is that the Game Genie is not wellly programmed when it comes to handling audio. If you use a Game Genie, they implemented some sort of audio channel and didn't correctly silence it. So as a result, although you can't hear it that clearly in our Onslaught video that we did, there is a buzzing hum, and you will hear that more clearly in games like Turricane. We will have got a slight clip of Turricane, but you will hear a buzzing sound in the background if you're using a Game Genie. So for some people, they may find that buzzing sound very annoying, and the only way to get around it is to play these games on a Mega Drive 1, which doesn't have the TradeMark security screen. So just to show you the TradeMark security screen in action, this is the game Onslaught. That's the unlicensed Accolade title. Now, I should point out Accolade did eventually get round to sorting out. They had a bit of a disagreement and a legal battle with Sega. In the end, Accolade did later become an official third-party publisher for Sega under license, and some of their later games do actually have the licenses. In fact, games like Zero Tolerance, which is actually a really good game, was officially released and under license, as was Combat Cards, and there's a few other games as well they did. But it's weird, they go from being an unlicensed to an officially licensed publisher, which technically retrospectively makes their unlicensed game licensed in a weird way. But to begin with, as I said, I'm going to show you Onslaught, and this is Onslaught when inserted into a Mega Drive 2 by default without using a Game Genie cartridge. So as you can see, basically it's pretty much black screening from the get-go. And to an untrained eye, if you didn't know what was going on here, in fact it took me a while to actually research this issue myself originally. There's a few people mentioning it, I thought, well hang on, this is not really explained. And looking on YouTube, I haven't seen anyone at all mention about the TradeMark security system and the fact it means certain games will not run. And I have seen people in the past mention, oh, my Japanese copy of Altered Beast does not run on my Mega Drive 2s. And of course people are like, well, you must have a faulty cartridge then, may need repair, etc, etc. And actually, no, it doesn't need repair. Altered Beast, by all accounts, does not, early revisions of the cartridge do not run on the Mega Drive 2, period. Same with Alex Kidd. And I've seen Alex Kidd, people saying, oh, my Alex Kidd. So you have to be very wary, because to have said to the untrained eye, people may think this is broken, I should throw my cartridge away. So now this is Onslaught using the Game Genie. So you're going to see the Game Genie splash screen appear first, and then we're going to just literally, I'm not actually running any codes. The code light for the Game Genie is off, and then we're just going to we're just basically going to insert the Game Genie, start, then go. So as you can see, we only need to literally just you're literally only using the bypass feature. I don't really like using Game Genie codes, but because of how the Game Genie works, you can do some very interesting codes. But as you can see there, it's working perfectly. Now, to follow on what I said about Turricane, Turricane, as we said earlier, is really bizarre in that it works fine on a PAL Mega Drive 2 tested. I assume it works on a US Mega Drive 2. The game was primarily, as Accolade were a US European publisher, I assume it works by default on both the US and European one, but I've not tested it on a US Mega Drive, so I can't be sure. But for the Japanese Mega Drive, we know for a fact, because our NTST unit is a Japanese one, it fails the license check and refuses to boot. And we tried this with a region cartridge as well, so we knew it must have been a BIOS issue over just a region lock. And sure enough, as you can see in this video, when we tried Turricane with the Game Genie, it works perfectly on an NTSTJ machine. So as you can see, that is Onslaught and Turricane, and basically the Game Genie is a lifesaver. If you've got these games, you will not be able to play them by default on a Mega Drive 2. Well, certainly Onslaught's case. And it's a really handy piece of kit. So if you are a Mega Drive owner, I would highly recommend you get yourself a Game Genie, just because there's some really neat things like this that it does. So basically, if you've got a Mega Drive 2, get yourself a Game Genie. And in fact, there are a few other things, because the Game Genie enables you to do some very other interesting bypasses as well, which I'm actually going to discuss one in a little bit. So a lot of kudos thanks to Codemasters, that are still going strong British developer who actually came up with the Game Genie. That it's a real lifesaver bit of a kit, and without it we would not be able to play games like Onslaught on a Mega Drive 2, and it's actually really, really handy. Now there is one caveat with playing Onslaught on the Game Genie, and that is that unfortunately, because of how the password system worked, you can't actually get passwords. Basically, the game itself uses a very rudimentary system. Once you're in game, there's no way to exit out. You have to press the reset button, and that then takes you back to the menu screen to grab the password. You have to go to the password screen and grab from that. Because the Game Genie's in there first, it goes back to the Game Genie, and because it goes back to the Game Genie, it wipes the status of your progress in the Onslaught cartridge. Basically, by default, when you press the reset button, it doesn't hard reset it, it soft resets it, so the game is still in the Mega Drive's memory. But unfortunately, because we're using a Game Genie, it soft resets it back to the Game Genie instead, and thus, as a result, it wipes the soft memory of Onslaught. So you won't be able to get passwords, and Onslaught's not a quick game, so you're going to be having quite a long sitting finishing it. Turricane, on the other hand, doesn't have a save feature, so that works fine. Indeed, most of the games we said earlier, it's only really the games with battery backups, but Onslaught doesn't use a battery backup, it's just the password system is not particularly well implemented. So, I mean, you can still use the password system, but you'll have to do something like play the game on emulator, get the password from an emulator, and then play that on the real Mega Drive, which may be a bit cumbersome and kind of defeats the point of being able to play it on a real Mega Drive if you have to use an emulator in order to get to the passwords, or a Mega Drive 1. However, the Game Genie does have some really other nice features, and it does allow you to actually tweak a few things. Certainly it can be used to bypass the region lock on some games, and it can also apparently be used to adjust some of the PAL coding. So I would be interested to know if games like Streets of Rage 3 could be made playable via a Game Genie. Now, I'm not a Game Genie whiz in entering codes or creating them, so even I don't know exactly how you basically it works on adjusting hex lines. Now, you do have to be slightly careful with the Game Genie, because if you implement wrong code, so don't just go randomly inserting codes at random, because the Game Genie can write to areas of the Mega Drive it's not supposed to, and it can damage the system. It can also damage cartridges, erase backup RAMs, and other horror stories if you enter the wrong code. So do be in mind that you should not just randomly enter numbers on the Game Genie screen. But certainly if certain features like the PAL optimization are in the hex values, which I believe is what the Game Genie edits, it's possible to find codes that will edit and interrupt and change. So it might be possible to play something like Streets of Rage 3, or perhaps Toe Jam and L2, as we discussed, were both PAL optimized games, or even Echo the Dolphin 2 on a Japanese or US Mega Drive with the European cartridge, bypassing it. Now, I don't know for certain if you can do that, but you may be able to. One game, however, that is very interesting, and full credit to Archer McLean's, is Jimmy White's Snooker. And the reason this is because the game was coded directly to work with 50 Hz, they've actually adjusted the region lock, so it's not the standard conventional Sega region lock. I take my hat off to Archer McLean. I'm probably pronouncing his name. I think it's McLean, because Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker, an iconic game on the Amiga that was ported to the Mega Drive, that's got a European-only release, is actually region locked in a way that if you put it into a Japanese Mega Drive, as I'm going to show you now, even when using a region lock, see there's the conventional Sega screen, and then it appears that it goes into game and everything's hunky-dory till you get past the credits screen, and there you go, as you see, PAL and CCAM Mega Drive only. Now this is really interesting because this is not conventional region lock. They're bypassing the initial Sega screen and going into game. And I think, as Archer McLean was a British programmer, apologies to Archer if I'm mispronouncing his name, I suspect it's actually checking the hertage of the Mega Drive once it starts. And by default, no standard region bypass device that we tried it on. So we tried it on a Nitro 2 adapter, which by all accounts works on almost every game. And of course, this is what's happening. You're getting this. So clearly it's a very intelligent check. And there is a way to bypass it, however, and that is using the Game Genie. However, clearly, even though we did bypass it, the game was clearly designed for 50 Hz, and as a result, there is some graphics corruption present when playing, and I think there's some audio corruption as well. So I don't advise you run this code, but just to show you, we're now going to try Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker using the Game Genie, and you will see we are actually able to force the game to work on an NTSC Japanese Mega Drive when the Nitro adapter, our standard adapter for bypassing, simply didn't work. So as you can see, during some of the shots, there was some graphical corruption, certainly during the break. It's all standard sort of corruption. And again, it didn't look quite like whether the game was full screen. It's clear that this game is optimized purely for a PAL Mega Drive. So I wouldn't actually advise using this code to bypass the region lock on Jimmy White. I think this really is a PAL exclusive game. And if you want to play it, I would highly advise you get 50 Hz PAL European Mega Drive. It may work on an Asian Mega Drive as their 50 Hz JPN, but I can't be sure as we haven't tested it on one of them. But basically, you need to have the PAL system in order for this to work. If you're a fan of snookers, this is quite an iconic game, so I would highly recommend it if you're a snooker fan. But again, you will need a PAL Mega Drive. And it's one of those reasons why you do get a lot of people who say, oh no, everything's always best in NTSC. Well, actually no. If you have an NTSC Mega Drive, you won't get the best out of Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker. Clearly, this game is properly designed, and I do take my hat off to Archer McLaren. They've really gone to town to make sure this game is designed purely for a European system, and they've optimized it properly, so it's working at the very best. And it's nice to see that there was some British developers that did that for the Mega Drive, and it is a game that is effectively, as it's a power exclusive, is a game you can only really play if you're using a European Mega Drive. You said there's graphical corruption. It's nice that this code bypasses it on the Game Genie and allows it to work, but from the corruption we saw while playing it, I would not recommend you use this code for long periods of time. So the other issue we covered in our gaming video right at the end is the 6-button controller pad for the Mega Drive. Now the 6-button controller pad are called the Fight Pad in Japan, I believe. Now for those who don't know, the 6-button controller is the later Mega Drive pad. It was released in, from all the dates I'm seeing, 1993, and it was designed to basically support the release of Street Fighter 2, the iconic beat-em-up. Basically, Capcom were very astute and managed to exploit their Nintendo, because Nintendo liked to lock developers to their system, and Capcom found a way to exploit that and actually release Street Fighter 2 on the Mega Drive. When they did, however, there was one problem, is that the Mega Drive by default only had a 3-button pad, which had a start button as well. And on the 3-button, if you've ever played Street Fighter 2 on the Mega Drive with the 3-button pad, basically you get either all 3 punches and all 3 kicks, and you have to press the start button to change from all the punches to all the kicks. It's very, very convoluted to use, and it's not easy just to suddenly swap between doing a fireball to a hurricane kick. If you wanted to change between punches and kicks, it's very, very difficult because you have to keep pressing the start button to physically change what the buttons are doing from punches to kicks. It's not ideal, and so the 6-button pad was created to accommodate for this issue. It's also designed to make it slightly more compatible with the SNES, because basically the SNES by default had 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 buttons, and the Mega Drive, of course, by default only had 4. So it made slightly porting to SNES games to the Mega Drive slightly easier if you were using a 6-button controller. However, basically, from what I can see, I believe that the 6-button pad itself was basically exploiting the way that the Mega Drive actually read its pads in order to get in the extra 4 buttons. You have to remember the 6-button pad actually has X, Y, and Z and the special mode button. Now, when they actually developed the 6-button pad, it's clear Sega realised there were some issues with it, as primarily the mode button. As explained in the previous video, if you hold down if the game doesn't support the 6-button pad, now some games it's not always clear exactly what's going on with the 6-button pad when you use it. Some appear to be fine, others have some weird and wonderful things. Some it's outright clear that there's something going wrong, such as the game crashes, or sometimes you just can't control the character at all correctly. And as a result, the mode button was basically used to force the pad back into effectively a 3-button mode, which most Mega Drive games will then read correctly. And instantly, if you don't know how to do that, basically what you need to do is turn off your Mega Drive, or before you turn it on, hold down the mode button on the controller, then power on the Mega Drive, and keep the mode button held, varying between 5 to 10 seconds depending on the game. Some games require a longer press than others. Ideally a maximum of about 20 seconds, but basically just hold it down. Usually it's about 2 to 5 seconds you just got to hold it down for, but sometimes some games need a little bit longer, and then basically the game should control and play correctly after you've done that. You must be holding down the mode button when you power on the console. If you hold it down after you've powered it on, it will not work. Now, Sega obviously knew this because they included that feature, and they also even mentioned in the manual that certain games don't work with it. And just to give you an example, there are some quite big titles. So, for instance, Forgotten World actually crashes if you have the 6-button pad in by default. Sunset Riders, you can't access the 2-player inverse mode. Mrs. Pac-Man controls slightly erratically. At first, Mrs. Pac-Man is one of these games that is not clear at first that anything is wrong, because you can still control Mrs. Pac-Man. But as I was finding when I was trying it out yesterday, you're tapping up and down on the D-pad, and things don't quite... Sometimes Mrs. Pac-Man does what you say, sometimes she doesn't. The minute you put into 3-button mode, it works correctly. Golden Axe 2, you can't move correctly. I think you could only move up or left. You can only move in one direction, and that's only by holding the mode button, bizarrely. Basically, the mode button somehow becomes the D-pad. Fairy Tales Adventure, the cursor for the item selection goes crazy in the shops and the password screen, I believe, on the 6-button mode. Indeed, there are some other weird ones as well. So, Sports Talk Baseball, I saw a few people talking about this on a few internet forums. The game will actually crash if using a 6-button pad when 2 runners get doubled up on a single base. Now, I don't believe that was a European released game. That's a weird one. So there's some really weird issues. Williams' Greatest Hits as well. Certain games on that collection. I think there's a couple people specified Robotron Defender 2. There might be more. They don't quite work. correctly unless you actually have to hold down the mode button as it boots into the games. King of Monsters, which we tried ourselves, that's basically non-responsive should you use 6-button Joypad. I tested that myself, it does not work, period. For some reason you have to hold down the mode button for nearly about 15-20 seconds. You have to hold down for a very long time for some reason, abnormally long in comparison to a lot of the other games. You have to hold down for a really, really long time. Other games that are mentioned as not supporting it are Slime World, or Todd's Adventure in Slime World as that was called in the US, I believe. Stormlord Troubleshooter is mentioned as having issues. Arch Rival is mentioned as having issues. I've seen people mention Castlevania Bloodlines, although that's quite a late game. Cal Ripken's Junior Baseball as well, apparently password screens or something on that one's fidgety. Some people mentioned Herog Zwei, although again there wasn't much information documenting as to what was going wrong on some of the games. Again, NBA Hang Time as well was mentioned as not being correct. John Madden as well. There's also mentions of games like Air Driver, Alien 3, Clue, Decap Attack I should say, or that's Turbo Magical Hat in Japan. I just know I've said the name wrong for that. And Double Dragon 2 was mentioned as having issues. Jordan versus the Birds, Pit Fighter. So it gives you an idea there's quite a few games. Now, as I said, the mode button's the best way to do it. Ideally, and this is a catch-all caveat that I think covers any Mega Drive game, if the game does not feature 6-button pad support in the manual and basically does not offer any type of 6-button pad support, you should, even games like Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic 2, although they work with the 6-button controller, if you're doing things properly, you should by default automatically put the game into 3-button mode, because sometimes, as we've seen, it does add in crashes and stuff, and it's not always clear exactly what's going. Basically, the game wasn't programmed to use it, so even games like Altered Beast and Alex Kidd, you should always select 3-button mode by default, regardless of whether the game appears to have issues or not, because if the game wasn't designed to use it, then you're going to see some weirdness. So always hold down the mode button and put it into 3-button mode unless the game is directly stated as using 6-button controllers. So games like Streets of Rage 3, which use those extra buttons, you should use it on Street Fighter, Super Street Fighter 2, etc. Interestingly, Techno Clash is a weird one, is that actually has problems with the 6-button pad if you don't set the option menu to 6-button pad mode. It's an interesting one in that the game supports it, but when you go to the option menu, there's an option to have it in 3-button pad mode or 6-button pad mode. If you have it in 3-button pad mode, I had some weirdness controlling with the 6-button pad, but as soon as you put it into 6-button pad mode, it works fine. So the game actually supports the 6-button pad, but you have to do it via the option menu. So that's a slight oddity compared to the rest of games. And interestingly, there are a few games that actually have hidden functions when you press the mode button. There's a few lists on a few sites, but I've not been able to check any of them, so I'll let people have a play with that themselves. So basically, press the mode button and see if it does something on the game. Certainly that will be on some of the later games. I think Star Wars Arcade, if I recall, the mode button changed the view on that one. That's one I do know works. But basically a few 32X games and a few of the really late Mega Drive games. Now, it's a little bit difficult for me to video these issues because for the most part, ideally it's one that I actually really need a camcorder to show me adjusting the Mega Drive, you pressing the Mega Drive pad and then you're seeing the response on screen. As we don't use a camcorder setup and I don't really want to be filmed myself on camera, that's not something we can actually do at the minute. We don't actually have a digital cam. We don't actually have a camera for those type of recordings anyway, so. But I'm just going to show you Forgotten World. So to begin with, this is Forgotten World run with the 6-button pad. And you'll notice you can select the option menu, and at first everything appears to be playing correctly. But watch what happens as soon as I start the game, and particularly what will happen straight after the beginning intro has played out. So as you can see, there is an odd flash and the game over screen basically comes up. There's no way around that. That is utterly balked, basically. Forgotten World does not like the 6-button pad at all by default. Now, as I said, this is what happens when you do the mode button trick. So basically, on Forgotten World, this next video, I held down the mode button, I think, for about 5 seconds, and then we launched the game. So you can see there, Forgotten World is now working perfectly with a wired, and I should state wired, 6-button controller. Which is actually a bit tricky to, as I said, demo, but as you can see there, Forgotten World's a really good example. Basically the game, because of how it works, actually gets a crash when using the 6-button joypad, but if you use the mode button press, it does work. Now, the infrared controllers are a little bit of a caveat difference. They get, as I said earlier, they get all the issues that the 6-button pad. However, because of how they work, their actually input is slower than the original 3 and 6-button controller, and as a result, the mode button doesn't always correct some of the issues present. Indeed, Forgotten World, as you saw there momentarily, is a game that the IR controllers actually said in the manual, that's the infrared versions of the 6-button controllers, did not work at all. In fact, the IR controllers, basically for Forgotten World, there are 2 games directly stated in the manual of the infrared controllers that don't work at all. They are Golden Axe 2 and Forgotten World. Basically, in both cases, from as I understand it, although we don't have these controllers, I'm not sure exactly what's going on from the technical point of view, but as I understand it, the IR controller by default runs the timing slightly slower from what I read, and basically as a result, because it's still slower, it's not able to do everything the 6-button pad is, and thus certain games don't even recognise it's the 6-button pad, they just go crazy. And in the case of Forgotten World, from what I've read, the crash that you see just keeps occurring even if you have it in 6-button or 3-button pad mode. And I believe Golden Axe 2, I think it's the same issue, the controls are screwed up but you can't correct the controls. Now, Sega obviously knew this because both Golden Axe 2 and Forgotten World are flagged in the manual of the IR controller as not working with the infrared controller. They also flagged the following games, and many of these had issues with the 6-button controller, as having problems with, in fact, well, they don't say problems, they say not recommended to play with IR 6-button controllers. What not recommended meant in Sega's official language is these games are broken in some way and will not play correctly. So in their official list of games that are not recommended to play with the IR 6-button controller, Bison, this is listed in the official manual: Air Driver, Alien 3, Clue, Decap Attack, and I assume by default that's in Casedo's Magical Hat Turbo Adventure, Double Dragon 2, John Madden Football, I believe that's the original game, Jordan vs. Bird, Pit Fighter, although quite why you'd want to play Pit Fighter on the Mega Drive, I don't know, Todd's Adventure in Slime World, again just Slime World, Stormlord or Troubleshooter. They are all mentioned in the official infrared manual as not supported, so if you have one of those games, you need to switch to a 3-button or a wired 6-button controller and use the mode button. These games don't work correctly with the IR controller. Not sure exactly what, but there's something wrong with them. And again, be aware that the IR controllers are actually pretty rare on the Mega Drive, as with the IR controllers on the Sega Saturn, which again may have similar issues. They're so uncommon, so few people have them, that most of the issues are pretty much undocumented. And even what I'm saying in this video, although we're covering it loosely, you may find there's a lot more problems than what even we list, because we don't have them, we can't test them. And there doesn't appear to be many people who have taken the time to really test the IR controllers with a whole range of Mega Drive games. So if you've got the IR controllers, certainly spend time with each game to make sure it's playing correctly with both the 3-button pad, and then test it with the wireless IR infrared controllers and just see if there's any issues. Now, another game that some of you might be very interested to know about, especially if you're a Mega Drive fan, this is actually a Mega CD title, and this is the European version of Lawnmower Man. Now, if you're a clued up Mega CD fan, your jaw has probably just gone, yeah, I know what's coming. Lawnmower Man is quite a rare game to actually get in the European Mega CD, primarily because the game was actually recalled. So if you've got a copy, consider yourself lucky. I know there's a few sealed boxes have turned out because it was recalled. A few people found like full boxes. But, and this is the caveat, there is a reason it was recalled, and I wouldn't be surprised someone was fired for this, because if you can manage to get your hold of a copy of Lawnmower Man, if you take the CD, if you pop it into the Mega CD, the game will not load at all. And the reason for this, when Lawnmower Man was pressed for Europe, the game had a misprinting, and as a result, there was a mistake put into the actual CD, and the region code was incorrectly set for the Mega CD. And instead of being set to Europe, the region code was set to the US. And as a result, if you put the game into a European Mega CD, the game will not run, period. In order to get it to run, you have to actually put the game, the PAL version of Lawnmower Man, into a US Mega CD. Or, if you want to play it on a European one, as a couple people joked, you actually need a Pro Action Replay, or a Pro CDX, I think they're directly called. But yeah, there's two versions of Pro CDX, and I should warn you, one was only designed for the Mega CD 1. The Mega CD 2 version is pretty rare and expensive in order to get, so it's not easy to come by. But basically you need an action ironically, you need another device to actually basically have to bypass the region coding on the Lawnmower Man in order to get it to play, because the European version was incorrectly printed. As a result, the game, as said, was recalled. You'll be very, very lucky if you find a copy of this in the wild, because the game, as said, was recalled. But if you've got yourself a copy, consider yourself lucky. They do come up from time to time on eBay. It's not as rare as some of the more sought after games. It's purely a collector's thing, however, because unless you've got a Mega CD, a US Mega CD or an Action Replay cartridge, you won't be able to play it on your PAL unit. The only other way you can play it is, of course, if you use emulators such as Fusion, which I've sometimes used to play Mega CD games. That will, of course, run it, as you can adjust the region on the emulator. But basically, it's Lawnmower Man by default is probably more a collector's item because of its recall. But you will see it from time to time on eBay. I think usually it's mainly sold by collectors who are aware of the problem with it. But it's certainly something to consider if you fancy buying a copy. Now, for a bit of fun, the last thing I'm actually going to cover, and this is probably a bit of trivia that a lot of people I don't expect know, is the Sega Channel. So I expect quite a few people have sort of heard glimmers of it from the US and Japan. Indeed, from, as we mentioned earlier, the Japanese cartridges, by all accounts, because I think it was quite an early service on the Mega Drive in Japan, did not support the TradeMark security system screen and actually requires a region bypass. And it was rolled out in Japan and the US. And interestingly, there's actually a few pages on the internet still about this. Initially, there was a Wall Street Journal one I saw from about 96 that basically said, despite the fact the service had failed disastrously in the US, a company called Telwest was actually going to roll it out in Europe. And it did actually get rolled out in Europe, which quite surprised me because most people probably aren't aware of this. And here's actually a little picture of Andy Peters, that famous children's BBC presenter back in the day. These days he does stuff, the morning shows. As you see here, he's advertising the Sega Channel. Now, this was actually rolled out in a number of areas in the UK. It's not a huge amount of areas. Looking at the cities of sort of London, some of the big cities, certainly didn't hit our neck of the woods, but it hit a few of the cities. And basically what it was a cable channel that I believe somehow you plugged into your TV and then or your phone. Then you plugged this cartridge into the Mega Drive. You plugged something into this cartridge, and then it would allow you to download games that were available from the channel each month. Now, it can only hold one game at a time from what I've read, and as soon as you turned off the Mega Drive, the game would evaporate from the cartridge's memory. However, from what I've seen, there were a few games such as Echo Junior that were released on this service, and that would mean Echo Junior's only UK release was via this service. Now, some of you are probably thinking about now, well, hang on, I barely remember this. And even if you lived in somewhere like London, you might go, well, I don't remember this at the time. That's because this service bombed like there was no tomorrow. It tanked, it flopped. I think the Wall Street Journal's page that I read said it best when said it flopped in the US, so why bring it out in Europe, basically. Now, it was actually released in 96 and it ran from 96 to 97. But as many of you may be aware, by this point everyone was already on the 32-bit systems. In fact, the Saturn and PlayStation were already in full swing. And this subscription-based service, I assume if you paid for the subscription you were sent the cartridge. Now, the cartridge is pretty, to say is very, very uncommon, so I assume most of them got thrown out when the channel went down. It only lasted 2 years before it was cancelled, so clearly it didn't, not even 2 years, probably about a year and a half from what I gathered, from 96 to about the end of 97, so it was. And by then, no one was playing 16-bit games. A lot of people had emigrated to the newer systems. Plus, as it was using a cable system, how many people had cable? But it's a really nice oddity that it got released in the UK. And although so few people had it, and although because it's it doesn't predate the internet, but it predates when most people had the internet and when a lot of the abilities to archive information was available, because even the sort of early emulators really would have been in their very early stages at best at this point if they were even made. So the only interesting point I think about the Sega Channel is the fact it did include games to download that a lot of people thought never got UK releases, and they did in fact do, but of course they're only via this channel. So basically, if you have one of these cartridges, consider yourself very lucky. It's a very nice novelty piece of history. These days the cartridges are absolutely useless because the channel's long gone. And of course, if they didn't store the game, if they stored the game into memory, these cartridges would have been worth a fortune. But as they don't, and if you take one of these cartridges, plug it into your Mega Drive, switch it on, it'll just be dead, or probably ask you to connect to the channel or whatever. It's just purely a collector's item at best. It's a novelty, and it's nice to know it got released in Europe, and I suspect very few people, I've certainly never seen one. I don't even remember when we were at school anyone ever saying, oh, they've done a Sega Channel, oh, we're downloading games. I don't remember anyone. 96, 97, said we were all playing Sega Saturn and PlayStations. People are going Tekken, Ridge Racer, Virtua Fighter. Who was going to go, let's download some Mega Drive games? You're like, nah. So it's an oddity. It's a really nice piece of history, but that's about it. If you have one of these cartridges, consider yourself lucky. They are very, very uncommon. Very, very uncommon. Right, I think that just about covers everything I can say about the Mega Drive. We could do a more in-depth list on the 6-button Joypad because, again, it's another issue. There's not a huge amount of support for actually listed on a lot of websites, and there's a lot of conjecture as well. But at the minute, I think we'll stick to just covering the 50-60 Hz stuff because that's a big enough task to tackle as it is. Both these points, such as the license screen and the 6-button Joypad, are something well worth considering, and it's something to bear in mind. Keep in the back of your mind if ever you have tech problems. I'll be honest, we've had so few dead cartridges. We've had, as I said, I had one dead Altered Beast cartridge, and we've had one issue with one NES game. Never had any problems with SNES games. My copy of Mario Kart on the N64 took me ages. So I've got a Japanese copy, and that took ages to clean to get working. But other than that, we've never ever had issues with cartridges. So few of them have actually died. I've had the odd battery backup need replacing. And indeed, if you've got games like Pokemon Gold, Pokemon Silver, any game that had a battery backup, such as Animal Crossing, Far East of Eden Zero on the SNES, that used a timer clock, that will have died years ago. But most of the others are still pretty much going strong. Yes, there is going to be death date where they all start dying out, and some do just die out from time to time, but it's an easy enough job to replace. So if you ever get a cartridge with issues, don't think, oh no, I need to chuck it out. No. Investigate, find out what's wrong. How are you using a 6-button controller? Is it an unlicensed game, or is it a game that does not support are you using a Mega Drive 2, and is it a game that doesn't support the TradeMark security screen as we discussed? Or perhaps your Mega Drive or your cartridge just needs a clean. Don't go throwing out a cartridge unless someone's actually told you, yep, this is well and truly dead and we've taken it apart and found the CPU ROMs died entirely. Basically, unless it's that extent of damage, or you find the cartridge physically sawn in half or something, it's probably still going to work. So I think that's just about covered everything possible we could. I hope you've enjoyed these two sort of gaming knowledge videos on the Mega Drive. I don't think we'll do too much more coverage on the Mega Drive. We could do some more stuff on Nintendo, and probably could do a slight PlayStation video about 50, 60 Hz. So we might do at some point in the future. But for now, I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope this information saves a few cartridges as well. And I hope there's a few people who have these games thinking, I can't get them to work. So I'm thinking, okay, right, time to buy a Game Genie, or, you know what, I'm just going to try the mode button on my 6-button pad to see if that works. I hope you've enjoyed it. I am, of course, Random Gamer Riven. As always, you can follow us on Twitter over at Randomised Gaming. Check the link below. You can follow me as well on Twitter, and I'll include my Twitter link once down below. You can also follow our blog with our daily art updates and videos, etc., and the features we run. And, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. The more the merrier, as they say. The more people we get, the more encouragement we can do and think more ambitious projects we can do in the future. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you, and that's me signing out for now.